So good morning and afternoon for those of you based in Asia. My name is Catherine Kenyon and I work within ActionAid on the Transforming Social Capacity project. And a very warm welcome to this webinar, which is looking at how we can encourage more women in search. For those of you who don't know, the event is linked to a paper which was commissioned by the Transforming Social Capacity project. The Surge project is made up of a consortium of 11 agencies, and we're really looking at how surge capacity can be delivered more effectively within the sector. We're part of the Start Networks DET programme, and we're particularly looking at how surge capacity can be delivered in more localised ways. It became really clear when we, at the outset of this project, so we've been working for 3 years now on piloting new approaches to surge. But it became really clear in the baseline for all the projects that there was a real gap in terms of women in surge and how agencies were encouraging women to be part of their surge systems. So we were incredibly pleased when 2 of our consortium members, so ActionAid and CARE, decided to take a lead on writing this paper and really gathering some first-hand experiences from surge professionals on their experiences as women being surged. I'm conscious we did actually launch this paper in May at Canada House, but we're conscious that a lot of our consortium members and people interested in this topic weren't able to join us in person. So that was the premise of organising this webinar to engage with a wider group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over in a moment to Sonia Rupra from ActionAid, who commissioned the paper in the first instance, and then we also have Siobhan Foran from CARE, who was one of the interviewees in the paper to talk about her experiences. And before I hand over, I've been reminded by Kadir that if everybody could please mute themselves, so if you are not speaking, you can put yourselves on mute. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Sonia.
Thanks, Kat, and thanks everybody for joining this conversation. I'm sort of hearing an echo in the room. Is yours on?
I think there's a few people who are on mute.
Is it you? It's you, yes. Okay, good. I was hearing myself through Kat's computer. It was slightly distracting. Anyway, thank you so much for joining this conversation. This was such an interesting area of work to kind of have a little bit of a deep dive into. And I just want to acknowledge that in this, we've got a little room here in ActionAid. In the room is Claire Bleasdale, who is also one of the authors and researchers for the piece of work. And Kathleen, unfortunately can't join. I think she's on holiday, but also she's based in Canada, and the time zone with everybody that wanted to join this call wasn't going to work. So we're so grateful, Siobhan, for you stepping in, especially as one of the people who was a contributor to the paper, to talk from sort of a CARE and also your personal perspective. So thanks so much to everybody that's been involved in it, and for the project for giving us this opportunity. So just I'll just kind of give a few highlights from the report, from my perspective, then Siobhan will give a few, and then we're going to open it up a little bit, not necessarily for Q&As, but if you do have questions on it, that's fine, but really for a discussion around other agencies' experiences in this area, your personal experiences in this area, and any other recommendations you have. So bear that in mind. I'll come back to those questions once. So onto the paper. Is the sound quality okay? I'm sorry, I'm reading out loud the message thing. Okay. Good. Okay, all good. So just to re-emphasize, for the purpose of this discussion, as some of you may be very involved in the project and you may not be, by surge we mean place doing the right thing in the shortest amount of time possible. So we're talking about, for the purposes of this, the rapid deployment of women. And I hope you've had a chance to have a look at the paper already, but we'll just talk it through. So we assert in this paper that we need a better balance in our surge practices as humanitarian agencies. That's rapid deployment roles, particularly at the leadership levels, have been traditionally dominated by white men, and we do need to urgently challenge our ways of working so that we can empower and enable more women in rapid deployments. If the humanitarian response team is predominantly male, the needs of women and girls can be overlooked. We recognise there's starting to be some changes in the sector and some pockets of good practice in humanitarian agencies, but starting point for real impact, we must go much further and take these issues much more seriously in our agencies. And I do want to reflect that since we did launch the paper in May, there has been quite a little bit of a buzz around it and a lot of interest, which means that the timing is right and the agencies are really interested to improve their practice here. And that was quite an important recognition, I think. So we interviewed a range of different women on different surge rosters to find out some of the barriers that they faced in their roles. Of course, we were talking to people who are deployed, not those who have self-selected not to take up these roles. So that certainly biased the findings. And maybe the next phase, if someone wants to pick up, is those that haven't been able to deploy. Some of the barriers and challenges that women face relate to personal safety and security, confidence and skills, personal hygiene, well-being and support, issues of personal commitments and childcare, and dealing with patronising or sexist behaviours. We heard some very personal stories of women who faced condescending and sexist treatment by the male colleagues who were patted on the head, who asked what they had done with their children while they were away, and left them on their own, who've had to stand up to stigma and prejudice. We also had stories of people who've had amazing support from their own organisations or from their families and friends that enabled them to be deployed and to have the confidence to take up these key roles. I know that when I'm deployed, I've become very conscious of how I will be more confidently to be taken seriously, and have more than once been thrown into situations with other deployed humanitarians who are all white, male, known to each other, and really quite happy to ignore my inputs into a conversation. I suspect some of us have been there. As humanitarian agencies, we have to challenge the culture in our organisations where they might still be quite patriarchal, and recognise our own policies, structures and operating systems that might undermine the roles of women in rapid deployments. So in the paper, we highlight a number of recommendations for humanitarian agencies to address some of the barriers for women in surge. We recommend all agencies to aspire to equal representation of women in deployment teams and in different levels of roles. Safety and security came up as such an important issue that we recommend that safety and security briefings should make specific reference to gender-related safety and security and should be ideally led by women. Investment in capacity building of surge staff is also important so that women can increase their confidence and skills base. And we need to role model leadership to challenge stereotypes and inspire and create space for more women to follow. Peer support of women is also important. Who's welcoming them when they arrive in a different country, and who can they contact outside of the country? We recommend that humanitarian agencies have specific deployment policies and systems that enable staff to have a good work-life balance and make allowances for costs of childcare and family responsibilities, and make sure that staff know about the policies and can call on them without it undermining their opportunities. So these are just some of the recommendations that we've made in the paper. We've highlighted some good practice from some of our agencies. And I'll hand over now to Siobhan, whose voice we haven't heard yet, just checking in that you're there and you can hear us, to talk through some of the ideas in the paper from her own perspective. Siobhan, are you?
Yes, hi Sonia, can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Oh, good. Great, thank you so much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak. It did come through Kathleen, who you quite rightly said is on leave. So I'm the Gender and Emergencies Coordinator with CARE in their operations side for just 4 months. But I did have the pleasure to contribute to this paper, to engage in this paper. But I really do need to acknowledge it was Kathleen O'Brien, our Surge Capacity Coordinator, who's the co-author on the paper. Before speaking specifically to the paper, I wanted to share with you a story of my own, which I didn't have a chance to share in the paper. And it was when I was part of a standby partner seconded to a UN agency last year based in northeast Nigeria, in Maiduguri. When I shared with some colleagues and friends that I was going to work in Maiduguri, the response was pretty much universal. All expressed concern about my safety there. And the concerns were related specifically to being female in such a dangerous situation. One of my colleagues was a security advisor with a large international organization, and he connected the security with the security advisor of another international organization who's working in Maiduguri. The feedback they gave me was that I should be very clear about the security arrangements in place and to be reassured about the sending and receiving agencies understood and responded respectfully to my concerns. So I asked a lot of questions of the standby partner and of the UN agency about the security situation and about arrangements for women there and the degree of comfort that women who were already there felt. But to be honest, I wasn't satisfied with the answer that I was getting. In fact, I actually felt quite patronized and that I was being difficult with the numerous questions that I was asking. But I also felt under pressure to go, as if I wouldn't get another deployment with them unless I took this one. So I went. Unfortunately, there were no security incidents at a personal level while I was there, but the fact remains that my concerns were treated very, very dismissively. So that's my story, and I have a few others, but that's one to share with you today. So just to talk then specifically about CARE's record on women in surge capacity. Pleased to say that CARE has a gender-balanced rapid response team. In 2015, the global deployment statistics by gender were 43% women, 57% men. And by 2016, that had actually turned on its head, with 57% women and 43% men. Also between 2013 and 2016, tracking the job profiles on the rapid response team by gender, there were many roles that remained dominated by one gender or another. So for example, men in logistics, procurement, safety, security, shelter, and of course women in gender, communications, sexual and reproductive health, information management, and HR. No surprises there. But we're pleased to say again, we're increasingly seeing better balance in roles that can be considered as stereotypically male. Funny enough, we can't say the same about roles that are often considered stereotypically female. So for instance, looking at the information from to date in 2017, were the deployments, now I'm not talking about the roster, but the actual deployments, that was the information I had to hand. Gender in emergencies and GBV, 100% female. HR, 77% female. So we're not seeing as much coming through on the roles that are stereotypically female. So at CARE, we believe that it's the combination of our programmatic mandate plus an organizational culture plus sensitive surge management approaches that account for the shift in the gender balance on deployments in recent years. On programmatic mandate, a focus similar to some degree to our colleagues in ActionAid on gender equality and women's voice serves as a foundation that has seen the organization working quite deliberately to walk the talk on these issues. I should add that CARE has many specific policy guidelines and a series of supportive tools related to gender and emergencies, and these have seeped through into many areas of the organization, including our own recruitment practices. On organizational culture, CARE acknowledges the symbiotic relationship between programmatic mandate and organizational culture, and the importance that both have in impacting not only the quality of our programming, but also the ways in which we work and the values that we hold and demonstrate. But that said, it's not all rosy, and I'm not going to try and pretend otherwise. There most definitely is a lingering boys' club culture that still affects some leadership contexts within CARE. But we recognise the importance of naming these, discussing them, and challenging the hidden and invisible power structures. And then finally, to gender-sensitive management, because of awareness raising across the organisation, managers approach staff issues with a greater degree of understanding and commitment to gender equality. And most of the CARE staff interviewed confirmed this, particularly true in the case of key surge staff. So if the key to success is this convergence between mandate and organizational culture, philosophy, values, and approach, the key challenge for us is making this convergence happen rather than waiting for the chance confluence of people, time, and opportunity. And just one or two more points before I hand back to Sonia. to prepare for the webinar, I had a lengthy conversation with Kathleen about the organization's culture and philosophy, and we agreed that this had much more bearing on our success in this area than policy and procedures on achieving gender balance and equality. However, the difficulty, as you can imagine, in addressing and influencing change in our change care or any organization is that culture and philosophy is much more difficult than changing policy and procedure. Organizational culture isn't very tangible. It's obviously easier to conduct a gender audit of policy and program than to feel the pulse of an organization's culture. In fact, I was thinking about this in preparation for today, and I liken it to the concept of dignity in humanitarian action, in that the word dignity appears in mandates, mission statements, standards, guidelines, but very difficult to pin down in a definition, and definitely very, very difficult to measure, to monitor, and to evaluate. And then just one more point, and then one more example, if I could. The paper refers to the perception of humanitarians as being gung-ho or somewhat reckless, and this has been seen more as a masculine trait. Kathleen and I discussed this and agree that there is still a tension within care between the stereotypical gung-ho-ness of humanitarian response and the need for inclusion, equality, and a compassionate tone to our response, which was seen as more feminine qualities. And to give you a concrete example on that, related to the subject topic of women in surge, and one that sounds quite similar to my own. There's been some discussion quite recently within care about mostly female RRT deployees who have turned down deployments to very insecure environments such as Yemen and Syria, citing family concerns and fears for their own safety. And I understand that some senior management within care say that RRT deployees shouldn't be allowed to turn down a request, and have suggested, but not set out straight, that if they do, they jeopardize further requests. Fortunately, others, including the Surge Capacity Coordinator herself and other influential senior managers, don't hold the same view. So while I can confirm that care has seen progress on getting more and more women in surge, there's clearly some lingering resistance to change, meaning that we really do need to keep our foot on the pedal. And sorry, just one more point, Sonia, please bear with me. I did want to make one final point and then I'll hand back to you because I don't want to hog the valuable questions and examples from other people that can share with us. I would stress that the focus of the paper is on international surge. But I do think it's important that we recognise what it means if international NGOs don't model the rhetoric it espouses in promoting gender equality and women's voice in humanitarian action, or the impact it has on programme targeting and quality, as well as advancing the whole partnerships and localisation agendas, if the face of international surge is predominantly male. So another study by Care International in UK in February of this year called She is a Humanitarian, one of the key findings, issues that emerged through the consultations for that study is that women's organisations, local women's organisations and local individual women are already playing a key role as frontline responders in crisis affected communities. So if the surge capacity of international humanitarian organisations don't reflect that reality, then it's relatively more difficult, if not impossible, for the connections to be made between this local female capacity and the international response. Some thoughts, and I leave it with you. Back to you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, for sharing your own personal experience and CARE's experience and some of the challenges that are being faced. And I think this issue around organisational culture came up quite a lot in the study. And it, like you say, it's a very hard one to come out with recommendations about how to change culture, because it can take 10 years to change an organisational culture. So I'd be very interested to hear from others now about any of the things that have been raised here, whether it's a question or we would be quite interested to hear your own thoughts, good practices from your own agencies, some of the challenges you might have faced, and any other recommendations that you have, just picking up on some of those areas that we've spoken about. It's quite hard to facilitate a conversation on Zoom. I think you have this ability to put up a hand on Zoom. I don't know quite where that is exactly. So if you want to put up a hand or write something in the chat, if you want to make a comment or to speak, and we'll try and pick up as many people as we possibly can. And you
have the power to unmute.
Oh, and you have the power to unmute yourself. I think we took the power away from you and muted everybody earlier, but now you can take the power back and unmute yourselves. So we have someone, Azmat from Pakistan, with a hand up. Excellent. Would you like to go ahead? Azmat, you will need to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you, probably.
Hi. Good morning and good afternoon to various people in various parts of the world. I hope colleagues can hear me. I hope my voice is audible to you people.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this issue of increasing women participation in humanitarian actions. I have listened to some of the speakers. Yes, this depends on the organizational culture, but the organizational culture again in turn depends upon the society culture where the organizations are operating. I'm giving just a few examples that why even if an organization wants to modify its culture, but it finds it difficult to increase the women participation due to patriarchal structure back in the educational institutions, back in the society, and back at homes. The very, very relevant example that is coming in my mind, like here in Pakistan, if you visit any engineering university, you see like almost 100% students as male students in the civil engineering. And when you are going for a humanitarian response and you need a civil engineer who is supposed to design and implement things on shelter and wash and various site management and site planning, it is quite difficult to find even just a women candidate to appear for the test and interview of a civil engineer. So perhaps.
And you have this common agreement with say US for both parts. Yeah, the first part is that, and then we'll
Right, our internet is failing us. We can't hear you, Azmat.
We need to broaden up this. We need more women in humanitarian educational institutions to our society, to our organization. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Azmat, and a big challenge, as we know, to challenge all society culture and patriarchies, but it is so fundamental to how this situation has evolved. Does anyone want to come in with any comments or questions or thoughts from their own perspective? We would love to hear your own experiences as well. The resounding silence. Anyone here? Claire, do you want to share any of the other anecdotes from the report? Okay. Okay, so can you come here? Yes. So Claire, one of the report authors, will jump in while everyone is still thinking. Okay, brilliant. Yes, Abby, I would love to hear about your conference. Let's hear from Claire and then from Abby.
Hi everyone, and thank you to Sonia and Siobhan for their summaries earlier on today. So I won't go into too much detail, but just to share that it was fascinating talking to a number of women from across various organisations and hearing their experiences. And as Sonia said, very much shared experiences from women in different contexts. So we spoke to women who were internationally deployed, and thank you earlier to, I wasn't sure, Azmat, who was speaking to say the different cultural contexts that these women are being surged into and the different challenges that brings. I think one of the fascinating things for us in speaking to women and their experiences was that those shared experiences, but also how many people were very keen to speak to us, that perhaps it was the first time that they were able to do so, that some of the women had commented that they didn't necessarily speak to people in their organisations about some of the issues that they'd raised, and if they were to do so, it would be very much in an informal setting where they might go to the pub of an evening, and that's where those discussions will be generated, rather than having any context in organisations where they feel comfortable speaking to a line manager, for example. And I know Siobhan, that with her experiences about feeling that people were being difficult perhaps if they were to raise issues. So I think that's one of the recommendations that we'd come out as well, that's so important that those spaces are available for women to be able to speak about this to all of their colleagues, both male and female. With that, I think we'd spoken about some of the recommendations for organisations and the cultural shifts within that too, but also, and I know we said it's not just a case of changing policy, but I think some of the commitments ActionAid have made, both with changes to their policies for our updating our policy to try and make that more inclusive and to focus on women to be involved with our roster and to be recruited to that. But also some of our commitments, for example, for the WHS commitments, where we've committed by 2020 to have 50% of women in leadership positions, and to have that in place, I think is a really positive step for women to be involved.
Thanks so much, Claire. Before I come to you, Abby, I'm just going to comment on this. There's a message. I want to know the main issue in the previous meeting details to understand the goal of this meeting. So just to remind us why we're here, the idea of this was just to share the paper on encouraging more women in humanitarian surge, some of the findings, conversation about any other recommendations that you might have, challenges and experiences that you also have. So it's a conversation, Rosina. It's not to come back with anything very strong unless anyone has a strong recommendation that we can take forward. Open up the debate so that we keep this issue high on our organisational agendas. I hope that makes some sense. So with that in mind, Abby, we would love to hear from you. You've been doing some work with IRC. Let's hear about that.
So hi, everybody. My name's Abby Green, and I've been doing some work with the IRC in Uganda last week, and we convened a conference for women who work in emergencies or on local emergency rosters for the IRC, and so we spent 3 days together. And I just thought it would be useful to make a couple of comments about what people felt, what the women felt were their main challenges and challenges to other women in going into surge or going into emergency response. So what it really came down to was being given the opportunity. And there certainly there's an issue around gaining skills and experience if opportunity isn't facilitated or isn't offered. But it wasn't a question of women being afraid or being unable or not having the skills, capacities or potential to fulfill those roles. It was really about being able to actually put those things into practice and go out and respond in various different disciplines and functional areas. The things that they felt were going to be most useful, actually, interestingly, were not really addressing the big societal changes that perhaps are part of the wider context of whether women respond in surge or not. What they felt was the most important thing to address was having a consistent organisational policy that supports changes in organisational culture. So that was really felt like the most important thing that could happen, and less so that they would need to go out and challenge much wider societal issues at this stage. So relatively, they deprioritised the societal context, preferring to prioritize what was happening within the organization. And if the organization had more consistent policies across the different countries where it was operating, they felt that that would help them to replicate those bright spots, replicate those best practices, and they would have more women responding in surge because they were supported by their own organisations to do so. So I thought those were really useful learning points, just in summary from that conference. We learned a lot more, obviously. Some really interesting things came out, but those seem to be key because they're areas where people can focus their activities and work together to make some changes that will actually have impact.
Thanks very much, Abby. And I think some really interesting points there, that actually people have the confidence and the skills. It's just actually having the structures and systems around them to be able to perform them effectively. And our organisational culture has come back again. I think that so far it's our recurring theme. Thank you. There's a couple of comments. This is from Uzma. Did you consider last meeting sharing regarding the personal challenges? Uzma, I would love to hear your personal challenges if you have some that you would like to share. It depends on, an individual whether they're willing to share them. If you're there, would you like to share any of your challenges that you've faced? That's a direct question.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Okay. Actually, last meeting I have shared some my personal challenging being a part of the search member. I am also part of the plan global roster, and I have been deployed in 2 places in Myanmar as well as in Philippines. And it's not challenging. Actually, it's an organizational culture as well as the management priorities. And sometimes I feel that if someone have opportunity like a woman, the other male colleague have a lot of pressure to why the only one girl or one woman have this opportunity again and again. Although we are being a female or the woman, we have a lot of responsibility of my house, my children's, and we are managing everything, and then have to do this type of outstations deployment. That is also a challenge for the personal level. But actually, if the organization facilitating, then it would be more enabling environment for the person or the woman who have part of the search team. Last meeting I have shared that being an organization, we consider local context and situation, and we try to be a flexible policy for the women, because we are not competing men likely to the women, because they get a less opportunity while grooming in this sector. They have a lot of other issues, and being a woman, they have maybe the accessibility, mobility, and also our responsibility at home. So it need to be some flexibilities how we can be attracting policies for supporting them, or maybe we have to suggest that initially maybe in the search we have a short time of the deployment, later on can be support on the Skype or the Viber or the WhatsApp. They have a lot of designing the tools, capacity building of the staff, or like that. So it could be also supporting to the women to be part of this rosters. So that is very important. And other thing we can be used, it's if being a fresh joiner, like girls, and they can be initially trained on these things, and then we can be 5 years or 10 years with us, and later on they can be grooming, and they can be independently independently they do their responsibilities. It would be a more flexibility for them. Or sometimes we can be during the deployment we have to be some time that they go back to their home, they go back to their to go to their homes, and they have do their responsibilities and also join. So it can be some different arrangements. We can use it for their attraction for this deployment. Yeah.
Thanks, Uzma. That was really interesting. And while I've still got you there, I'm just going to ask a follow-up question, which is, you've talked a lot about being more flexible, and you gave one really nice example of maybe allowing deployment to go home to check in on your home responsibilities. Did you have any other recommendations that would have worked for you, that you would say to an organisation, if you're going to be more flexible in your policies, you really need to consider this other aspect? Very briefly, if you have anything on the top of your mind. I can see Lisa has a hand up and there's some comments. So if you have anything, Uzma, to add, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you so much. I hope my voice is coming. You people can hear me.
Hi, Azmat. Sorry, I was just asking Uzma to respond. I think your internet is unstable. I'll come back to you.
Okay. Thank you. I think so. I have a lot of things that we can be shared within the organization, as well as sometimes we have in organizational responsibilities. So we do our objectives. We have to be end of the year to responsible to perform against these objectives, and then have because the staff have a lot of responsibility within the organizations. How we can be utilize and fulfill the both places, that is very important. And when and mostly I think so in a deployment we mostly write to the employee or a member of the roster member, are you available for the deployment? At that time, maybe the within the organization, maybe the management have a lot of reasons. No, you have this task, you can't be allowed to go there. First, you have to be completed your jobs. At that time, maybe after a month, you have not much requirement to the deployment, because the emergency is quite a time. And after 1 month or 2 months, you may have not need to be deployed for this place. So this is also very important to look these aspects as well.
Thanks very much, Uzma, for following up with that. To Lisa now, as she has her hand up, and then Azmat, if you want to come back in again. Lisa.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Great. I had a question actually to ask to the authors of the report, and also to Abby and to other practitioners who work on the issue. How have you identified peer support among female humanitarians to be a potential channel through which you can improve policies and also organizational culture? Has that been part of your experience, trying to raise the profile of women instead?
Abby, did you have that conversation in Uganda last week? Would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. So that was a really important part of having the conference at all. And we brought together women from a really diverse range of cultures. So interestingly, they noted that it broke down some cultural barriers and stereotypes for them, as well as the issue that we were actually addressing. So we had people from all parts of East Africa. We also had people from the Middle East, and as far afield as Myanmar. So there were lots of different cultural backgrounds represented. And one of the things that was really important for the women was to come together and recognise the things that they were all passionate about. So the things that they really wanted to bring to their work, and realise how many similarities there were between them. The other thing that was interesting to me, and perhaps even surprising, was the keenness with which and the speed with which they put together different types of networking opportunities to take away with them. So they straight away set up a WhatsApp group, they set up group emails, they've got a space on their organisational intranet where they can post things, place resources, put ideas, have conversations. And we spent quite a lot of time talking about what inspires us to work in this area. And obviously there are people's individual inspirations, but they took time to explain their own stories as well. And so the depth of the relationships from actually spending time face to face was really enhanced. So yeah, there were, as soon as we gave women the opportunity to come together face to face, they were really quick to generate their own network strengthening activities. And those things have been maintained so far really strongly.
Thank you. And I'll ask Claire, as one of the authors, to also.
I think that came out very much so in a lot of the interviews that we took place, that not only that the women wanted to speak to us as the authors of the report and to share those experiences in that way, and to have that space where they're able to discuss that, but a lot of the things that we'd heard in the experiences was those relationships built on deployments, and having that go-to person to be able to trust, to share experiences, to offer advice, to share stories. And that was something that came out as a stopping mechanism, perhaps, for people to be able to have that person that they're able to speak to. In terms of a formal peer support network, I was aware from speaking and conversations with Kathleen, from CARE, who isn't on this call, but I was aware that that's something that CARE offers, that they have a more formal structure as a HR working group, and to look at how they can implement and support people on deployment as well, and having those spaces. So I think it is something that's very much important, and people find their own ways to access those peer supports if it isn't there in a formal situation. It's very much there, and a way that people can do that, and to work together and support each other.
Thank you. So as where's he gone? Asmat, I cut you off. Please do come in now.
I am taking all this issue in specific context of emergencies where we have been involved in humanitarian response. Increasing women participation in humanitarian response, like, we need engagement at so many levels. Now, the example which is actually coming in my mind is like when we operate in volatile security situations where humanitarian space is already shrinked, and where we many times need no objection certificate or something like that from the government. It is quite easier to get NOCs for women visiting the field area, specifically in projects which are like focused on women. Say, for example, if you have a project on reproductive health and sexual health, then definitely you need like women doctors and women nurses and women midwives to operate there. So it is not a big deal to get an NOC for your women staff to that place. But it is a practice even among the UN agencies that those projects which are focusing on, say, for example, shelter and wash and something like these, they usually try to put their male members for the field visits, because they fear that their NOC might be denied, although they do have women members on their teams, but but they like feel uncomfortable sending their names in the NOC applications. So as a humanitarian community, we have to engage with the government and make it clear to them that it is not only the sexual and reproductive health where women are needed. Like women have different needs in shelter, wash, and everything. And so that is one additional thing in addition to like my previous comments on facilitating women education and training in institutions. We also need to engage with the government and clarify this thing that why we need additional women in shelter and wash. And most of the times they have this mentality that women are not civil engineers, and so what they will do if they go to field. So that engagement is necessary with the government to change this mentality. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Azmat. Siobhan, I can see you have a hand up as well.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to, and I'm sorry, I forgot to put on the video earlier on, so apologies for that. I just wanted to come back to the question that was raised by Lisa, and also the point that was raised by Claire, and the importance of peer support. And apologies for coming back on this point after Azmat moved us ahead. But it really did come out from the discussions with colleagues in Surge of how important it is pre-deployment, so to give them those reassurances. So as a matter of course, yes, the CARE does establish those peer connections so that people can feel the comfort of knowing where they're going and what they're getting into. But also we have a very informal network as well. We call it the water cooler, which is just a very informal way of setting up a group of people who can come to a Skype chat box and can just put forward anything at all. There's nothing too small or too big that the group of about 14 people won't contribute and have experiences to share. So that has proved really, really beneficial for everybody. Could I also, sorry, now that I have the mic, could I also then just refer to a question that has been raised in the chat box, which I also found very interesting from Catherine, and that question that she has around champions in the organization. And could I just also take this opportunity to say that yes, Catherine, and to everybody, this has been absolutely key. And Kathleen was very frank about this, the idea that in fact the whole idea of having a progressive organizational culture on this was due to the fact that we had a few people within the organization, one or two in senior management that really took this on and championed this idea. And that is fantastic, and it means that it has grown, and there are more influential people within the organization who are championing the idea of having more and more women in Surge. But it also comes with a little bit of a risk that if there is a change in any of those personnel, that the energy around the idea also falls. So having champions has been absolutely key to being able to move this ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Siobhan. That's really useful. And I think there's some comments in the message that I won't, messenger thing that I won't repeat, but there's also some nice ideas in there about. We've got only a very short amount of time, but I wanted to come back, if I could, if anyone has any comments on this, to an issue that actually, Siobhan, you raised a couple of times in your earlier input, which was when you raised issues that were of particular concern to you, that you felt patronized. You also thought perhaps you were concerned you might not have other opportunities for deployment if you questioned something. And this is something that came out very strongly when we were talking to other people, other women who are being surged, that actually if they say no, if they question, if they challenge, well, actually I've got childcare issues, that then they might lose opportunities in future for their own professional growth and to be deployed. And I'm wondering if others here have faced anything similar to that they would be willing to share. or Abby, if that came up in your conversations at all.
Shall I share something? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just share one colleague are working in Pakistan. She has some challenges in a specific time period. She said, I could not go through for this area due to the security, as well as she has some personal problem. After that, she applied for the position, and then the manager said, no, we can't be appoint this lady because she has denied for at that time. So I was very surprised at that time, because it's a one time. She may have some personal problem, but they didn't discuss with her later on. So this type of attitude sometimes may have a lot of problem to being a, and later on she actually left the development sector and she joined in a college. So that is also very challenging for the it's some specific time if some have a problem, so they did not consider as a special situations. So I think so this type of behavior and we need to be discussed as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Isma.
Yeah, agreed with Isma. It's a massive issue that women end up being stereotyped as not appropriate for surge if they can't go the first time they're asked. And although we didn't specifically address it, it was one of the kind of our undercurrents that is going to be raised by individual participants as part of their own country programme policies.
Abby, I'm not sure if you're still speaking, but we have lost you. Hello? No, you stopped speaking. I'm sorry. We just heard this kind of funny background noise. Okay, thank you so much. I think we call most of it. There's a kind of an underlying issue that maybe we're not outing enough, and maybe that's quite interesting, Abby, that you said that actually it wasn't one of the core things that you were tackling. And I think maybe still people don't feel that safe to raise those issues, which is interesting. And I think it comes back to one of the recommendations we made in the paper about safe spaces and feeling safe to be able to raise these issues. We only have a couple of minutes left, so a quick
can I share something more? I remember some 2010 floods. So at that time, there is a lot of issues to deploy the team. So the management sometimes they have not discussed with the individuals that they just have to be ordered to go there and not considering the some engagement and some personal problems. And at that time, you have a lot of challenging facing not only at home as well as in office. So I think so the way management have communicated, that is very important, and they need to be shared with the individuals, discuss, and then how they can satisfy. That is very important, because in mostly disasters you have not a proper place and the privacy and then other needs, and especially the security. So that is our challenges, especially when you have to be in disaster. There is limited accessibility of the female staff at that locations, because their stay arrangements, their travel, their other matters. So that is very important. So for the engagement of the women, that we need to be considered as special policies, and then as well as to address the local context and situations.
Thank you so much, Isma. I'm going to just try and wrap something, because I think I'm going to hand back to Kat just before we finish, and I'm watching the time carefully, and it's nearly 11. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone that's contributed to this discussion, to the paper, to the debate, to the discussion, and I'm really getting a strong sense, as I said at the beginning, that this is becoming a much more important conversation that agencies are really having and tackling internally, which is so great. So I hope that this conversation will continue. So just to pick up on some of, there were some really interesting points raised about the wider society, about patriarchal nature of society, from international to national and local. And on the other hand, that kind of discussion that actually, if you're already in this system, how do we actually tackle things from an organizational perspective? And the culture of the organization is so critical. And the policies has come up quite a number of times, having that flexibility in your organizational policies, and a couple of examples around lengths of deployments and returning from deployments. There's some ideas, and there's some others in the paper that are really important if we're going to actually not only change the culture but the practice. And the idea also to have a culture of having champions with some identified risks of they might leave, but it's quite an important thing. We talked a bit about opportunities and career progression, and perhaps that's still a conversation to be had and continued, and perhaps to bring in HR practice and processes into that conversation would be very interesting. The question around peer support came up very, very strongly, and I heard that actually some of that could be easier now with technologies and some of the IRC colleagues to put together groups, but also that it's important to have pre-deployment support and peer support, do this formally and informally. So lots of really interesting things that have come up, and I'd like to thank everyone again for the conversation. And I'd love to keep hearing these conversations, and I don't know how we set up an informal discussion on this, but I would love to continue that and hear other views if there's any way of doing it. But for now, I'm going to hand back to Kat. Thanks, Kat.
An enormous thank you to Sonia and Siobhan for agreeing to hold with us today. A big thanks to everyone for joining online and agreeing with us here today. Just to say that this paper on the role of women in surge is going to be fed into a wider learning report that the Transforming Surge Capacity Project is pulling together. So it's one of kind of 8 different topics that we're looking at. And in terms of next steps for this, so we're producing this learning report, which we hope will go to not only our consortium members, but the wider sector, to really give some quite key kind of propositions on how we think the sector can be delivering more effective surge. We'll also be holding a selection of learning events in kind of November of this year to look at that learning report, but also to develop a roadmap with peers in the sector on actually what we can do within our organisations to change how surge is being delivered. And we're really keen to look at this topic, as well as topics on localisation, collaboration, sustainability for surge. And so if you're interested in finding out more, we have a web page and a Twitter feed where we'll be putting out information about these events, but we hope that you'll continue to engage with the project and looking at how we can deliver more effective surge. And I think that's it. That's my sales pitch done. So a big thanks again, and hope to see you all soon. Sorry for those of you who didn't hear, but yeah, we have recorded this, and we'll share a recording for those of you who are interested.